Hello, everyone. I'm Nicholas Budgeon. Now, on behalf of the John Smith Centre, I have the extraordinary privilege of welcoming you to tonight's hustings. We will shortly hear from representatives from all of the six major parties in Scotland as things stand. But before we hear from those guests, being in my final year of my undergraduate degree at the University of Glasgow, I've had the extraordinary honour, and indeed that is exactly the right noun, of helping with the youth poll. I've been part of this team of not quite experts, I suppose, yes, that's a good way of putting it, who've helped formulate the questions, who've helped test the questions, and indeed helped analyse the outcomes of this year's youth poll. The John Smith Centre, of course, runs all manner of really wonderful initiatives, not just this youth poll we'll hear about tonight, not just this youth poll course that I've been on this term, but also internships and a variety of other very exciting schemes. Now, I understand before we kickstart properly, we have a video to be shown, so I'll hand over to the tech people for the video. Thank you very much, and stay tuned for more.
The annual John Smith Centre Youth Poll is sponsored by Nationwide Building Society. It takes the pulse about what young people's attitudes and priorities are across the UK. Through a national survey of over 2,000 persons, including focus groups and interviews, it gauges what 16 to 29-year-olds feel about politics, democracy, and the world around us.
The state of the economy was a top concern for young people in the UK. Financial worries, job insecurity and housing instability all ranked amongst the top issues in this year's youth poll. These financial concerns, coupled with fears for the future, such as AI taking over more and more entry-level jobs, appears to be taking a toll.
For example, in last year's poll, 63% of young people thought their lives would eventually be better than their parents. But this year, the figure is 36%, a drop of almost half. If we want a happier young population, their priorities are clear: financial stability and affordable housing.
The state of politics in the UK and young people's role in it is also a big concern. As with last year's poll, more than half of young people said that they thought democracy is in trouble.
The majority of young people don't feel that they're being listened to. Of this generation, only 25% of young people believe that we're being treated fairly in comparison to older generations, and 30% don't trust in politicians.
But young people believe in political solutions, and they believe that their vote counts, and only a quarter think that politics is not relevant in their lives. 73% have said that they've engaged in some form of political or communal activity in the past 12 months.
Amidst times of global conflict, we have asked whether young people would be willing to take up arms. Exactly half said that there would be no circumstances in which they would be prepared to take up arms.
In contrast, young people believe that you have a humanitarian responsibility to get involved globally, although not necessarily a military one.
Despite all this, young people are still optimistic about their future. They believe in political solutions and they're generous to those from abroad who want to live in the UK.
But they want to see political leaders do better, listen better, and give young people a fair chance at making a good start in life.
So, good evening. Good evening, and my mic is working. Excellent, we can get going. Thank you all so much for coming here this evening to the absolutely, I spoke too soon, stunning location here at St Giles Cathedral, and a massive thank you to Reverend Scott Rennie and his team for welcoming us here this evening. You may have seen just across the road that the SDV Leaders Debate is also taking place just over there, and I predict it will be stage managed, highly predictable, and probably bad-tempered. All things that we're hoping tonight is not. And I expect from our fantastic panel, we're going to get a very different style of debate. We at the John Smith Centre, we believe in politics as a force for good. We want young people to get involved. And so together with the Scottish Youth Parliament, we're absolutely delighted to be hosting what I know is going to be a feisty but friendly debate. So a few ground rules for you out there. We want you to get involved in this debate this evening. Yes, we've got a great panel, but this event will be made by you getting involved. So we want you to applaud. We want you to cheer for your side. and I'm going to come to you for comments and questions throughout the evening. I was going to say this isn't a church. It is a church. But I want you all the same to feel as though you can really get involved and make this a lively occasion. What I'd rather you didn't do is boo or heckle or talk over our opponents. Whatever you may think about the views you hear this evening, the 6 young people who are standing here to do it tonight are doing something really special in putting themselves forward for election, and I hope we can all treat that with respect. So, there is one change to the advertised lineup. Zen Ghani from the SNP had to stand down due to a family illness. So we're really, really grateful to Callum Cox, who at less than 24-hour notice has come to represent the SNP this evening. So let's get cracking. Each candidate is going to get 60 seconds to make their case for their party. So I'm going to hand over to each one in turn just to give you their opening statement. So first of all, Iris Duane.
Hello, it does work. Hello everyone, my name is Iris Duane. I am a candidate in Glasgow, so Glasgow, Kelvin and Maryhill, and number 3 on our regional list.
For the Greens.
For the Greens, for the Green Party, the Scottish Green Party. Today, I'm here to put forward our vision of a fairer, more equal Scotland. Of a Scotland where young people like myself can go get a good education, buy a house, build a family, and find secure employment. A lot of the things like this that a lot of our forebearers got, many of us are afraid might not happen to us. I'm 23 years old. I understand a lot of these fears, and I'm fighting myself to make sure that we can have a better future together. I'm looking forward to hearing all the questions tonight and putting forward the Greens' vision on how we would solve that. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Iris. Next, Daniel O'Malley from the Scottish Liberal Democrats.
Thank you very much. I'm Daniel O'Malley. I am the Scottish Liberal Democrat for Glasgow, Kelvin and Maryhill, and I'm top of the Scottish Liberal Democrat list for the Glasgow region. Thank you very much for having me here this evening. It's truly an honour. I used to work at the John Smith Centre pre-Eddie's time, so there's no bias, don't worry. And it was such fulfilling work because at the end of the day, trust in politics and politicians is even more important today than it was over 10 years ago when the John Smith Centre was set up. And the work that the John Smith Centre does is absolutely fantastic. So I'll take the £10 off of Eddie at the end of this for that endorsement. But in this election, the Scottish Liberal Democrats are standing on a platform of, at the end of the day, tackling one of the biggest things that is challenging young people at the moment, which is neurodivergent testing. There is a massive backlog and we need to get a hold of it because it is vital for your start in life. I am dyslexic myself, and if it wasn't for being diagnosed as early as I was, I don't think I would be where I am today. So that is one of the big things we're focused on. We'll get into a lot of other things in the middle of this debate as we go through. So thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Daniel. Next, we have Ross Hutton from the Scottish Conservatives.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you to all the other candidates. Thank you to the John Smith Centre for hosting this. And most importantly, thank you to all of you for coming out. It's great to see so many people who care enough about this election and about our country to be with us here this evening. A wee bit about me. So I was brought up in East Kilbride. I'm standing in Glasgow Southside currently, and I'm immensely grateful to this country for the opportunities that it has provided me. It's the first in my family to go to university. I've been able to go into employment. I've been able to live in a wonderful apartment with my fiancée. I'm very fortunate in that sense. But I understand that the dreams that I had as a kid are now feeling unattainable for so many people out there and so many people in this room as well. That dream that was an absolute given for those who have gone before, where you could have a good, well-paying job that would buy a good house on a safe street and you could send your kids to a good school, and if God forbid anything happens, you would get a GP appointment, seems miles away for so many people. Now, I'm not here tonight to defend the status quo. I'm here to talk to you tonight about radical renewal. We are a fantastic country. We have great people in it, many of whom are on stage with us tonight. But radical candour means radical renewal, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about tonight. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ross. Next, from Scottish Labour, Eleanor Ryan Saha.
Hi everyone, good evening. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here representing Scottish Labour. I'm standing as a candidate in Edinburgh Northern, so I'm just up the road. I'm really looking forward to our discussion. I just wanted to share in my opening something from the Milburn review that I was looking at over the weekend. And it's the finding that in terms of the scale of this issue, for 16 to 24-year-olds, those not in education, employment or training, the number of those people is equivalent to the third biggest city in the UK. That is a crisis scale. If folks don't believe, if young people like yourselves don't believe that you can replicate the standard of living that your parents and grandparents enjoyed, that is a crisis. If we can have research coming out of Bradford that shows that you can take a child aged 3 or 4 and you can predict with unnerving accuracy that whether or not they'll end up in this NEET category by age 16, that is a crisis. And I'm Labour because I believe we look towards those crises. We don't turn away and we take them seriously in our policy. And I'm looking forward to sharing with you tonight how that commitment to social justice, that commitment to young people, that commitment to a good start in life runs through all of our manifesto and would certainly be a driving force in my own work as an MSP. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. Next from Reform UK, we have Jamie Maguire.
Thank you, Eddie, and it's an honour to be here alongside everyone today, and thank you for everyone coming out. I know it's a very sunny day and a lot of people are out having a drink, but it's good to have a civil debate on politics, and that's what it's about, you know, coming together, discussing ideas and what each of our parties are proposing for this election. So I'm currently a councillor in Renfrewshire. I'm standing in Renfrewshire West in Leven Valley, and I believe that you should vote Reform UK on the basis of opportunity and what we're putting in front of young voters. First of all, actually properly investing in apprenticeships. Now, I'm someone who went to university, did an undergrad, did a master's. It's a great route, but it's not the route for everyone. And so many people aren't getting the opportunity because the apprenticeships aren't getting fully funded. We're seeing that through the college sector as well. And as we see AI coming to the fore, we're going to see less and less, you know, jobs in the traditional sense in offices. So we need to look at skills and how we can actually get more people into the labour market. Also, as a young person, understand the issue of housing. That's why we're proposing for 15,000 affordable houses each year. And we need to get more people on, more social houses built. We need to get more people on the housing ladder. At the moment, it's near enough impossible, and young people just don't feel like they're getting the same opportunities as their elders, and that needs to change.
Thank you very much, Jamie. And then finally, from the SNP, Callum Cox.
Hi, thank you so much for coming here tonight, and thank you for giving me just slightly over 24 hours notice, not unused, but as you can see, I am in fact not Zangani. So I just want to give a little bit of an overview. I'm Callum Cox. I am a regional candidate in Central Scotland and Lothians West. I'm also a high energy and nuclear physicist, and given that I'm 26 years old, it also means that I'm younger than the Scottish Parliament. And like so many of you here tonight, it means that we did not get the chance to vote in 2014 and 2016. Our futures in the EU and as an independent country have been decided for us, and we are paying the consequences as a result. And as 750,000 people in Scotland have the chance to vote who did not get that opportunity in the past, that is exactly what the SNP is setting out in this election, and exactly why I want to try and see if we can promote and support those young people all across Scotland with our manifesto. Heading into this election, we're up against the dual threat of an increasingly brazen Westminster system, which exploits our resources, erodes our communities, and undermines our democracy. Alongside the rise of a billionaire-backed far-right crony club, scapegoating the most vulnerable in our society to the detriment of our planet, to our Scottish Parliament, and to take away our human rights. But we don't need to let that happen. We in the SNP do believe in a future, and a future that you should have the choice over. And we're standing to give you that vision of a fairer, democratic, greener society, out with Westminster's grasp, a choice to become an independent Scotland back in the EU. From capping bus fares to essential food prices, advancing the rights of tenants and to queer people, and combating the climate crisis and the cost of living crisis. Let's secure that future together. Please vote SNP. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Callum. Right, okay. Let's get going with some questions. And our first question this evening is from Ella McConaughey, right to the front here. Now, I think I might just give you my mic, Ella, and then you can ask a question, okay?
What made you want to get into politics?
That's a great question. Right. Let's just answer this nice and fast. And I'm going to start at the end of the row with Ross.
People. It's really that simple. It's people. At whatever age you get into politics, whatever you think about people, there is no substitute for getting involved with a political party and, as many people are, putting themselves forward for election. That's why I mentioned that in my opening answer. I think you said it yourself, Eddie. It's a very privileged and special thing to do. So if you're interested in people and you're interested in politics, small p, you need to get involved with a party, big P, to try and make the difference you actually want to see in society.
Thank you. Iris, let's just go down the line here.
Thank you, Ella. You took the good answer, unfortunately. Change, to be honest. As the kind of person that I am, the kind of life that I've lived, I've often felt that people like myself, like my mum, like my family, weren't often included in the decision-making process, and that politics too often is about a lot in like a bubble. They don't really understand what's going on, you know, in our communities. So I thought, what better way to change that than to bring our communities into politics in order to see that change. So that's why I got involved.
Thank you for the question. It's a great question. I got involved because I wanted to make a difference. That's why I went forward for the council. I was always involved with third sector organisations, local community groups, because I think that's where real change actually happens. You know, things will get spoke about in Westminster and in Holyrood, but really what matters to people on the day-to-day basis is how's our town centre looking, is there potholes on the road, you know, is the broken windows fixed? So I've always liked to be a problem solver, and that's really what drove me to get involved.
Ella, great question. Thank you. One of my kids, I've got kids, one of them's disabled, and now I work with disabled children and their families. And in that work, I often find that we come against a sort of ceiling, and we're banging our heads against it, and we can't get through it. And that ceiling will tend to be either the policy or the legislation that is the framework for all of our lives isn't matching up with what the families need, who they are. And that's my main motivation, is that I can't spend my whole life thinking someone should change that, and none of us should. And this is one way for me that I can try and be part of changing the systems that are broken.
Yeah, no, I mean, that is actually a fantastic question. Like, I don't come from a politics background, and as you can imagine, as someone that is specialised in nuclear and energy, this is not something I expected to want to do. But I decided to do it because I was kind of sick and tired of people coming straight from politics backgrounds who've been in political spheres their whole life and just don't understand what it means to any single person outside of those inner circles. So it's a way of being able to try and advocate for the very people that don't come from those political backgrounds, who understand the serious threat that we face to our climate and our democracy, and make sure that those are actually addressed so that so many of us in this room right now actually have a future in Scotland on this planet.
Thank you very much. I don't come from a political family. Nobody's really political in my family. And I found out when I had the opportunity to go to university that actually politics was something you can engage in, and that engaging in it wasn't just about political debates about ideology, it was about fixing things. And there's a line that we got against us from Kemi Badenoch that said, Liberal Democrats are the people that turn up and fix your church roof. And that kind of exemplifies why I think I stayed in politics from university, because actually it's about going and fixing stuff in your community at the basic level, but that's where it starts. And really anything you're doing as a politician, hopefully, is fixing stuff for your community.
Thank you so much to the panel. Right, let's crack on and get into some of the sticky issues. I will come to the audience once we've had another round on a particular issue. So I'm going to ask Amy Fraser, please, to ask a question. So Amy's just there. hopefully our mic will come to you very shortly. Amy, if you wouldn't mind standing up.
Yeah, of course. Hiya. I would love to know what's your party's proposal for tackling the housing crisis?
So the housing crisis in Scotland, we have a housing emergency at the moment. If you're back in the mid-90s, the average age of a first-time buyer in the UK was 29. It's now 34. Back then, a quarter of first-time buyers were aged under 25. Today, it's just 6%. And in our youth poll that we produced last week, housing went from 9th in the list of the young people's priorities to 3rd this year. So we know this is a massive issue for young people right around the country. Callum, I wonder if I could come to you first. And unfortunately, the SNP's in government, so you have a record to defend. There were 17,500 new affordable homes built in 2025. That was down the previous year. And Shelter Scotland are saying that the target that's been set to build 110,000 affordable homes by 2032 is going to be missed. So I guess the question for the SNP is, how are you going to tackle the housing crisis and how are you going to demonstrate that things are going to get better if you're re-elected than they have been in the last 5 years?
Yeah, I would say that obviously with the SNP government taking over since 2007, there's been a significant increase in the number of housing that has actually been built, including for social housing, since the previous coalition under Labour and the Lib Dems. That isn't to say that it's enough, and that isn't to say that there isn't more that can be done. However, what we are proposing is to build over 100,000 new affordable homes going into the next parliamentary session, as well as putting forward a new housing package altogether, alongside the right of first refusal for our tenants as well. We also introduced tenants' rights within the last parliamentary term in conjunction with the Greens, thank you very much, and was able to support tenants and ensure that they weren't facing some otherwise unacceptable conditions. Going into this parliament, we want to be able to advance a lot of the work that we have already been doing, including investing $4 billion into affordable housing overall, and ensure that there's a planning system in place for new house building being supported, with £10,000 being put towards the deposit for first-time buyers, one of the most important packages for young people being able to put that deposit down and actually secure your first home.
I think one of the issues that we often find is that, when young people look for their priorities to be taken notice of, they come second place to other issues, like, for example, the NHS. But you believe the SNP in the next Parliament will take this issue as a top priority?
I think they will, largely because a lot of the manifesto, as you can if you've had the chance to read through any of the manifestos, it is focused on a lot of things related to what's going to benefit our young people. Things like actually protecting free tuition and the under-22 bus passes, but it's also about looking at that first-time buyer support. That's something that is going to predominantly support our young people as they're moving into that stage of their life where they can settle down and have a home. And I do think that as a young person myself, the reason I do support the SNP is largely because I do feel that it does prioritise our needs as young people, and that is exactly consistent with the view of everything that we have pursued as a party over the last Parliament.
Okay, thanks very much. Eleanor, can I come to you from the Labour side of things? What's the Labour plan to fix the housing crisis and ensure that young people in this audience can get on the housing ladder?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Amy. Nothing's more important in our manifesto than housing. We're experiencing a housing emergency. Here in Edinburgh, right now, there are 3,000 children that are homeless, technically. They're in temporary accommodation, and part of my work is to support them. So many of them have disabilities and additional support needs as well. We all deserve homes that are safe and stable, and 3,000 children in Edinburgh don't have that right now. We also know that rents are totally out of control. And since 2010, across the Lothians, they've actually increased private rents by 104%. That's just, yeah.
Luckily, would you cap rents then?
Would we cap rents? That's a great question. We'd certainly be looking at rents as a priority in the next Parliament. It would come under our general review of planning reform, and we're also looking principally to unlock house building. So we're aiming to enrol the most ambitious house building project since devolution. We're aiming for 125,000 new homes. And this is not a figure that we're plucking out of isolation either. It's really linked to our education policy, and we're looking at how we can actually train a workforce that can deliver this as well, and how we can reform the planning system, because we know that it's not up to scratch just now.
Iris, the Greens would cap rents, but won't that only just dry up supply?
No, we absolutely disagree that capping rents would drown out supply, and working with the SNP, we did bring in some emergency measures, which got unfortunately abolished, and some new measures in the housing bill of last year, which won't take effect until 2027. In terms of supply, we absolutely recognise the urgency of why we need to start building houses immediately. We are now seeing in the last year, I believe, it is the lowest house completions since 1997, when we started taking records. Like you said, some rents are over 100%. In parts of my constituency, it's been up to 141%, I believe. So in our manifesto, us Greens are committing to building 15,700 new houses a year, of which we would like 80% of those to be social homes. This isn't a number that we've just plucked out of thin air. It's not, we haven't sat there with a magic ball, shaked it and come to it. That actually comes from a really comprehensive report from the University of Sheffield, which I actually read through as part of something I was doing for university, that says in order for us to mitigate these really damaging effects on the sector, so rising rent, housing unaffordability of buying housing, unfit housing, we need to build that amount of houses. But we can't stop there. I'm just going to jump in quickly. You mentioned previously about the NHS and how housing falls behind it. They're inexplicably linked. So Shelter also says that 1 in 10 houses are having an impact on people's health. 27% of houses are also unfit for the occupants. So they're either damp, overcrowded, or not fit for people's accessibility needs. So we would work with reforming the entire planning network and making sure that we're building accessible, suitable homes, and that would be required for all of the new homes that would start here in Scotland. We've already made some really good headway in Glasgow City Council with Councillor Holyrood bringing in feminist city planning, but we'd like to see some cross-party consensus about how we can make sure the houses we're building today are still fit for the future.
Thanks very much, Iris. Daniel, Liberal Democrats, you've got a big commitment, 25,000 homes a year. Would you work with anyone to get that done?
I think the Liberal Democrats have shown in the recent budget negotiations that that is what the Parliament is set up to do. It's set up to have consensual discussions about what is in the budget. You know, the polls are looking like it's going to be the SNP. When it comes to our house building proposals, yes, we're proposing 25,000 houses. We're also proposing 10,000 key worker houses, because actually you're going to the point about the NHS. There's parts of Scotland where that have employment shortages within the NHS, but people aren't able to go and do the jobs because there's not enough there's not enough housing up there. I'm thinking, you know, the Highlands, for example, the Islands, the northeast of Scotland. We need a key worker houser programme as well, so that people can take up those jobs that get us more workers within the NHS, but they also have housing, so that housing isn't a barrier to taking up a job, a vital job in the NHS.
Okay, great. Let's go to Ross and ask a little bit about the Scottish Conservative plans on this.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. So, owning a home is the absolute fundamental root of the Conservative promise, and that's what I mentioned earlier on. I think it's one of the foundations of our promise to people that's maybe broken down. So we want to try and revitalise that. One of the things we want to do is we want to scrap LBTT. That's a tax that you pay when you buy your home. We want to make it easier for first-time buyers to get on the property ladder, and we expect that will save the average couple buying a home around £900, which is a massive saving, especially in a cost-of-living crisis. One of the things that we are really encouraging of right now is a brownfield development fund. So you look around urban cities like Glasgow, Edinburgh, Aberdeen, there are plenty of brownfield land sites that could be absolute prime real estate for development. We want to have a fund to make it easier for people to go and build a home on that. And in terms of making it easier to build a home as well, we want to cut regulations, massive bureaucracy, massive red tape out there that's putting developers off building homes. I'm massive on this, right? We're all young people on this panel. We have young people in the audience tonight. If we want people who are bright, ambitious, smart to stay in Scotland, live and work in Scotland, you need to be able to own your own home. And that's something that we want to work to deliver.
Thank you very much. And finally, Jamie, right. So I was listening to Thomas Kerr, your candidate the other day, talk about his proposal, which is that you could free up more housing by removing refugees and asylum seekers and placing them in what he describes as potentially like disused military bases and things like that, which should be used. Is that, I mean, leaving aside the rights or wrongs of that, is that really going to make an impact?
Well, in terms of our housing policy, on that, what Thomas is referring to is currently Glasgow is 1% of the UK's population, but 6% of the asylum population. In terms of that equates to about 15% of council tax and temporary accommodation. So it's putting a huge strain on Glasgow City Council's budget. So that's what Thomas is referring to there in terms of how it would free up more money. But in terms of reforms policy for housing, you know, we're proposing 15,000 affordable homes. That's vital. Wages haven't been keeping up with the rise in house prices over the years. That's why it's became near enough impossible for young people to get on the property ladder. We're going to be building on brown sites because they're sites that aren't used and they should be utilised. The first protocol. We're going to reform the planning framework because there is too much bureaucracy. There's far too much bureaucracy at every single stage. So we need to reform that, streamline it, make sure we're actually making decisions more efficiently, things are done quicker. And lastly, the net zero regulations that have been mandated on new homes, whether that be solar panels or heat pumps, that's, you know, taking money away from building more houses. So if we take away those regulations, that mandate, then what we'll see is we'll see more money for house builders to build more houses. So we'll increase supply and we'll actually see more people own their own home and be able to get on the property ladder.
Thank you so much. Does anybody in the audience have a point they'd like to make about the housing issue? We've stunned you into sorry, no, the gentleman right there. Microphone will be coming.
Yeah, I'd just like to respond to what you said about removing regulations to make housing more environmentally friendly. We're facing an oil crisis right now. Surely what we want to do is to move away from these forms of energy, fossil fuel driven like gas heating in homes, and actually have well-insulated homes with heat pumps, which are more efficient and actually cheaper for the end consumer, and to subsidize solar panels on the housing, which will also lower the cost because that's free energy for the people who are going to live in that house. Surely that's what we want to do. It makes sense at every level.
Anybody like to respond to that? Okay, fine. After you, Daniel. Yeah. Fire away, fire away.
The point about the homelessness crisis and the housing crisis in Glasgow in relation to newly granted refugees, it is not correct that the refugees are causing the homelessness crisis in Glasgow. It is mismanagement for years of the housing budget, the housing stock. Literally, the population of Scotland who are newly granted refugees is like 0.12%. They are not causing the homelessness crisis. They're not causing the housing crisis. The housing crisis is caused by underinvestment in housing, which is what we've spoke about. The fact that your party has proposed moving them to, well, I think he had to clarify it wasn't concentration camps, so we'll just go with concentration camps. So I say if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck's probably a duck. It is not being caused by refugees. Refugees have full rights in this country. They've been granted through an asylum process that is efficient and effective. And the only reason it's not effective and efficient is because of legislation by the last government that held up the asylum process. That's why we have a backlog, and that's why we have a crisis.
Do you want to come back? Okay. I think anybody else want to have a say at all on housing? Right at the very back. Our runners are going to have to do some proper running here.
So temporary accommodation's been mentioned a couple of times, and in particularly, I'm from North Lanarkshire Council, and I know that in my experience, a lot of temporary accommodation is better looked after than actual council houses. So what is your party wanting to do to look after actual council houses that are in unsafe areas rather than focusing on temporary accommodation where people are only there for short amounts of time?
Okay, I'm not going to go all around all six of you, but if anybody wants to take the chance to jump in, far away. Eleanor.
I take your point. Unfortunately, what I'd like to underline is the word temporary is a complete misnomer. It tends to be very permanent for lots of families. And my experience has been that it isn't necessarily any better quality in terms of housing stock. And also the instability involved can make it a lot less desirable. You're still technically homeless when you're in temporary accommodation. I do take the point that we absolutely need to manage and improve our social housing estate, and we also need to build new social housing. It's as simple as that.
Right, Grant. Okay, we're going to move on to our next question, and it's from Hannah Clarkson. Hannah, is that you over there? Oh, your mic is not working. You may have to shout.
Oh, my question is, what policy from your manifesto will directly benefit young people the most in Scotland?
Okay, I'm going to go the reverse direction now. So sorry, Daniel, you're going to have to come first without any preparation.
I think the policy that's going to benefit young people the most is our focus on speeding up of neurodivergent testing. As I said in my opening remarks, genuinely, if we get that right, it creates a foundation for young people that will allow them to achieve what they want to achieve. Like I say, I was diagnosed with dyslexia when I was in primary 1. Iris and I were at a Hustings the other week when a mother told us a harrowing story about her son who was diagnosed at 17, and the mental health and negative mental health impacts that had on that young person, she was telling us, have gone well into his 40s. If we don't get that right, everything else is built on top of that. So in the recent, as Eddie said, a little bit of time to prepare because I did have that written down. In the recent Scottish budget, Scottish Liberal Democrat MSPs worked to get 7.5 million in the budget to allocate towards speeding up neurodivergent testing. We need to get that right because, in all honesty, I feel if I hadn't been identified as dyslexic and had all those outlined that early on, I wouldn't have done as well as I have through primary school, high school, university, because it allowed the support to be there. It helps young people and it helps teachers be able to support you through school. And frankly, it allows you to get on in life better because you know what condition you might have and how to manage it. And frankly, that's the best foundation we can lay.
Great. Callum.
Honestly, it's what I already mentioned about housing. I do think that the £10,000 support towards putting your deposit down and getting that first house is actually going to be life-changing for so many young people. Like, when you're working right now, the ability to be able to save up money just for that deposit whilst you're paying for a significantly more expensive rent than what the mortgage for that same property would have actually been, it's a problem. And so it's a way to be able to change that, put it on its head and let young people finally establish themselves and settle down. But I'm going to be cheeky and add the point that I do think that overall, the most important policy that will be game-changing for young people is to secure a democratic, fairer and greener future, fully, completely and without risk from Westminster through independence.
I was going to ask you whether the answer is not independence, given you're from the SNP. So you got that in there, right?
Oh, yes.
Do you want to give us a quick 10-second explanation as to why independence is going to provide us with that opportunity?
Yes.
I mean, we'll come back to independence, I'm sure.
Of course, of course. Fundamentally, under Westminster, under the current system, us young folk, we just don't have a future. On this planet, in Scotland, we don't. And for so many young people, they're now coming to that decision of, can I even stay in Scotland to build my life? That's the problem. And it's because of decisions taken at Westminster by politicians that we cannot elect who are making those awful, stupid decisions that's damaging our economy, damaging our planet, damaging our future.
But we have quite a big deficit at the moment as a country, which we would have to deal with if we were independent, right?
Yes and no. Yes. Well, not really. So the deficit itself is a bit of a misnomer for understanding how the actual public sector works, because the way that GERS works is it only reviews public sector economy. It doesn't actually take into account the private sector at all in its calculations. And importantly, it's also looking at a lot of spend done by Westminster that's incredibly inefficient and importantly spent without our consent.
Okay. Thanks very much. Eleanor. Eleanor.
Thank you. I'm going to focus on education, but before I do that, I just wanted to make a little point about my Lib Dem colleagues. Brilliant defence of the need for investment in neurodevelopmental pathways. I noted that he correctly described them in terms of neurodivergence throughout, and what I would raise perhaps is a slight concern that throughout his party's manifesto, these diagnostic pathways are discussed in terms of neurodiversity and the need to tackle neurodiversity. This is not the correct term. This is why you didn't use that term, obviously. But it really, for me, as the parent of a neurodivergent child and as a specialist in this area, it raises real concern about the Lib Dems' ability to understand this issue, to respect the people that are involved, and to make policy on it. So, yeah, whilst I agree absolutely with the framing today, I do wonder whether the manifesto is as eloquent as my colleague today. In terms of Labour's commitment to young people, we absolutely would maintain free tuition, but we recognise that the SNP has no plan economically that's viable for this right now, so we would be working with higher education institutions to make sure that that is financially viable. We also really recognise that learning is lifelong and comes in lots of different forms. We will invest really heavily in regional college development and make sure that these colleges are able to train folks in skills that they'll be able to use in their regions and that will be useful to them going forward. And we will absolutely guarantee an apprenticeship for everyone who applies for one. We'll also introduce a UCAS-style system to our apprenticeship schemes, and we will introduce 9,000 additional apprenticeships. So we're heavily investing in young people by investing in their education.
Can I just bring in Callum's point,
Yep.
which was he immediately went on the point around independence that, you know, he went to Westminster. And so do you believe Westminster and the Westminster Party is a drag on the Labour Party in Scotland in this election?
What I believe is that the SNP love to talk about Westminster during a Scottish parliamentary election. I'm focused on Scotland. I'm focused on young people here and what we can deliver for them.
Fine, that's short and sweet. Jamie.
Thank you. Well, I think the two most important things that we're offering is, first of all, properly investing in apprenticeships. Already mentioned it previously, the apprenticeships have just been neglected. We need to invest in skills, obviously with the rise of AI. We're seeing more and more large companies cutting back on their staff. Only last week we saw Meta announce that they are going to cut back in 10% of their workforce. That's a huge number. Microsoft said 7,000 staff. And this is just going to keep on happening. So we need to adapt to it. And one of the ways we can adapt to it is tap into things like advanced manufacturing, which Scotland's really good at. Build up our industrial base again, which has been totally neglected for several decades. But we've got that talent there, and it's just about training people up, investing in colleges so people have an option other than universities, because college funding's at all-time low. That's what we're seeing. College courses closing down across the country. Before I went to university, I did a HNC and a HND at Cumbernauld College, and they no longer do that HNC anymore. So you just think how many people are not getting that opportunity now because the government's cut funding in a vital sector. Another thing that we are proposing as well is our first job passport. So ensuring that every single person, once they leave school, that they're going on to whether it be apprenticeship, university, college, that's going to be a guarantee that they're not going to be left unemployed, because we're seeing not just unemployment, well, going up, but we're also seeing more people dropping out of the labour market, which is highly concerning. We're seeing more people getting wrote off, and it's so unfair, the opportunity that they're missing out on. One of the other things that we're doing is we're looking to reform the taxation system. So we've got currently 6 bands in Scotland. We're going to reduce that to 3. And what that's going to do is going to give everyone a double tax cut, because we're going to realign it to what we have in England, and then we're going to reduce it by 1 pence. So that's going to put more money into the economy.
So won't tax cuts reduce the amount of money you have available for the things you've just been talking about you want to provide?
No, it will provide more money to the economy, because more people spend money, and that will go into the Treasury, and the government can spend money in their public services.
Cool. Great. Iris.
I'll tell you one thing the Greens aren't committing to this election for young people, and that's cutting taxes for the ultra-wealthy to hand them more handouts. There's a lot
I don't think he's talking about ultra... to be fair, I don't think Jamie's talking about ultra-wealthy people. He's talking about average earners, isn't he, rather than ultra?
I believe there was some really good analysis that was done on reforms plans for the tax cuts, and it did find that significantly the majority of the money that would be given back to people would be the highest earners, and those on the lowest earnings, which I'm imagining is quite a lot of us in the room tonight, would get almost nothing back, and certainly would pale to the amount of cuts that they would have to make in the public sector in order to fund those cuts. We would be losing so much with the reform government that we already have here.
So the Green policy that's going to favour the young people is not tax cuts?
That was just something that we wouldn't do. We would not be cutting those. But my favourite part of the manifesto as well, and the thing that I think would help the most young people, is our entire section on jobs. So as a young person myself, I understand a lot of the fear now going into the job market. You might get a job, but it might not be a good job. It's incredibly difficult to get a career. As Greens, we'd love to see a doubling of the Just Transition Fund that we have right now to £1 billion for reskilling and working people into new industries. But not just that. We want regional jobs hubs that work with the sectors in the region, the colleges and the trade unions, not just to catalyse job growth, but to give people a pathway into those jobs. And also a massive, massive thing, and Daniel can attest to speak about this at almost every single hustings. Even when you have a job, the amount of poverty in work is ridiculous these days. We've got large corporations that are paying people poor wages that are keeping them down. So as Greens, if we got the possibility to, we would institute that any business or organisation that took public funds would have to pay all of their staff at minimum real living wage. And I think that really would support our young people as they get into their careers. Thank you.
It sounds very expensive. So who's going to pay for all this?
So our phrase in the Greens is that we tax wealth, not work. But we understand a lot of these things do sound super expensive. We've got a long section in our manifesto, I'm sure finances will come up at some point tonight anyway, about replacing council tax, about how we can use some of the powers that are devolved to us in Holyrood to bring in a wealth tax. But we understand government is hard. Our leader, Ross Greer, said at the launch of the manifesto, there's no such thing as a fully costed manifesto. You're going to be dealing with the shocks of government. You're going to be dealing with the external stimuli. So this is something all of our manifesto, of course, that's how Holyrood works, that we'd love to have a cross-party consensus to recognise these massive challenges that we're facing and bringing those in.
Okay, thanks very much. And finally...
Well, I just gave you their phrase in the Greens there. I'll give you the Fraser of Allender Institute's phrase for the Greens manifesto, which is not credible. Not credible. They went and costed all of our manifestos, everyone that's sitting on this panel tonight. When you actually go and look what they've said about the Greens manifesto, with all the tax rises and all the other spending commitments that they've made, they said it's not a credible manifesto whatsoever. So I would bear that in mind when you're going to the polls in just over a week's time. And actually, in terms of answering the question, when I was reading this poll that was made by the John Smith Centre, conducted by the John Smith Centre, one of the things that really jumped out to me at the early stages was the quotes by a young woman, 29 years old, who said that she was terrified of the future because she didn't think she'd be able to own a home or start a family. Now, we've already spoken about homes and building homes this evening, so I won't go back over that. And I'll give a slightly different flavour to the answer that I maybe otherwise would have given. I want to talk about childcare support. We'll have people in this room tonight who are maybe young parents struggling to get back into the workplace after having given birth, who don't know if they're going to be able to afford childcare for their kids. Now in Scotland, 3 and 4-year-olds get fully funded childcare. We want to expand that. So the Scottish Conservatives at this election are promising to expand funded childcare to parents from 9 months onwards. I think a poll a few years ago said that 73% of parents use childcare as a method of supporting themselves back into work. And listen, we all understand the pressures that parents are under. We want to make sure that as a party, we are supporting you not only to have a home, but to raise a family within that home as well. And for young parents out there, for any parent, but for young parents out there, I really do think that could be a game changer.
Thanks very much indeed. Right, over to you. What are the policies you want to see that you think are going to have the most effect for young people? Right, gentleman over here. Sorry, our mic is on its way. Just right to the front here. We could just have brief points, everybody, so we can get through these reasonably quickly.
Hi, my name is Bart. Young people in Scotland consistently rank climate change as one of their biggest concerns, and the Climate Change Committee advises that we need to change how food is produced and consumed, yet the Scottish Government's climate change plan ignores this advice and states that it will not proactively change livestock levels. Scottish Government schemes, such as the Scottish Secular Beef Support Scheme, incentivise environmentally destructive forms of animal agriculture at the cost of plant-based alternatives, which the science is clear are the most effective way to reduce our agricultural emissions. Also, sustainable local meat is not supported by the data since travel only accounts for a small amount of total emissions. So I'd like to know if you will facilitate a just transition towards a sustainable, affordable, and healthy plant-based food system by reallocating these subsidies, or will you continue to spend huge amounts of government money on this ecologically damaging industry?
Thank you very much. Let's have another point from anybody. The lady at the front here. Just at the front here, sorry, so just second row. Oh, you're going to come round the back, sorry.
This is a question for Daniel specifically. As a member of the Scottish Youth Parliament, my constituency thinks that mental health is definitely a big problem in our area. What are you going to do to actually support the people who have been given a neurodivergent diagnosis?
Thank you very much. Let's take another one. Right over there, yeah. In the hardest to reach part of the entire place.
Yeah, this is just around trust, and because I've got a lot of you in the questions, and of course the John Smith Centre focuses specifically on trust for young people. And this question is specifically for Jamie Maguire. How do you think people should trust politicians when people like yourself at your time at the university went in first year from being in the SNP and going to a youth trip to Parliament, at least in the SNP youth wing, going to Parliament and being chummy with the YSI, to the second year being a CLP member and a member of the Labour Party, having Jeremy Corbyn, and then when Labour ditched in the polls, you switch over to Reform and you take on their negative rhetoric on immigration. So how do you think people can have trust in young politicians like yourself when they see chancers?
Okay. All right, I'm going to ask Callum, I wonder if you could address the point around the just transition and the challenge I think the SNP has had in terms of the balance there. You know, a lot of people in the Northeast would say we need to protect the existing oil and gas networks. At the same time, there is this question around transitioning into renewables. So you want to have a go at that first, and then we'll go to the other issues.
Yeah. So, I mean, I understand the actual science behind it myself, and it's part of the reason why it's so important to me. It's infuriating to see so many people from, not just in Scotland, but like across the world, different politicians just completely dismissing the science behind it. It's part of actually what's motivating me to actually come forward so I can advocate for it. However, the point I would add, though, that often gets missed is that for it to be a just transition, it needs to be a transition. It's not something that can happen overnight, and it's not something that we can completely destroy livelihoods that depend upon, yes, environmentally damaging sectors without causing major disruptions, not just to their own lives as well. But importantly, it's also that for it to be a just transition, it is that we make the very people that's causing the reason we need to do this to pay. It's the super polluters that are causing these problems, not everyday people, including things like locally produced meat by comparison. If you, as an individual, were to spend your entire life living a net neutral or even net positive, like you did absolutely nothing damaging in any shape or form to the environment, you would set back the clock on the climate crisis by not a year, not a month, a day, not a minute, but a fraction of a second. And this idea that it's down to individuals and, importantly, local communities that have to then pay for what is effectively littering from these super polluters who are dumping carbon everywhere, I just don't personally see that that's fair or even remotely just. So that's my personal opinion on this, is that I think it's right that we don't completely disrupt everything to do with local communities or even supply chains that currently exist. It's about making sure it is a just transition, hence with the Northeast too.
Okay, Eleanor, could you want to have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I'm trying to do it without talking about my Westminster colleagues. However, Ed Miliband did raise this idea that the time is the time is right for doubling down on net zero targets. You know, the geopolitical context that we're all aware of shows us that it's never been more important ethically in terms of the climate crisis, but crucially in terms of global security, to become sustainably fueled as a nation. So yes, we support the just transition. Yes, we're going to meet the target of 2045, which unfortunately my SNP colleagues are nowhere near on track to meeting, and will take all the measures that are needed to meet that target. I would also raise, I think I was thinking about this during a previous question that alluded to the climate crisis, and I'm interested to see what my Reform colleague will say about the reasons for not pursuing net zero, because on previous Hustings panels that I've been on, his Reform colleagues have drawn attention to their disagreement with the climate emergency science. So I'm excited to hear your thoughts.
We'll come to Jamie in a minute. Iris, I listen to Zach Polanski a lot at the moment, and I can't hear him talk about anything about the environment these days. What's going on with the Greens?
We do get that a lot. Green politics is about more than just the environment, but it is absolutely rooted in our environment. The first, I believe, 10, 15 pages of our manifesto are about environmental sustainability, and the manifesto also ends on how we can make our food chains more sustainable. I'd actually like to disagree with my SNP colleague here. Whilst there are many people in the SNP, like Callum, who are incredibly green-minded like yourself and do believe in that just transition, there's also that split of opinion that we see across the SNP about investing more in oil and gas, about drilling further and further. We don't trust the SNP to do this on their own. As Greens, we believe in a radical just transition, one that upskills and supports the workers in those industries, especially in the Northeast. But it cannot be a Thatcher in the coal mines moment. This is not about turning around and saying, your jobs are over now, we've got to move into the future. This desperately needs to be invested in this next parliament, or we will be losing years upon years upon years. Rightfully, young people are afraid about the climate because we see all of these awful headlines about the things that may happen, and we see all these big businesses and governments at times not do anything about it. I have been happy with some of the work that Ed Miliband is doing, but we must be going faster and harder to get the outcomes that we need.
Ross, drill baby drill?
Not my line, not my line. We spoke about a just transition there, and the word just is within that. Listen, Iris has just mentioned Margaret Thatcher there. Right, okay, I don't think talking about something that happened 40 years ago is particularly relevant, but if you want to use that as a case in point and example, let's do that. I don't see how creating hundreds of thousands of job losses in the Northeast is good for the people of Scotland. I'm yet to have that adequately explained to me. There's research out there that says that jobs in renewables are not keeping pace with jobs in the fossil fuel industry, right? So what we'd be doing effectively at this point is putting these people out of work, or just as bad, sending them abroad to work elsewhere. We also mentioned super polluters there. China emitted more pollution in 8 years. In 8 years since the UK has, since the start of the Industrial Revolution. That's what we are up against when we really do talk about the real super polluters of the world. It's not those working in the Northeast. It's not necessarily those Scots working in the fossil fuel industry. It's states like that. And the SNP and John Swinney seem quite keen to take money off the Chinese state in this election, so I'd be fascinated to hear how independence is a way to actually getting a just and green transition, if that's the people we're jumping in bed with.
Okay, Daniel, you can come back on that. And maybe you could also, in your answer on just transition, also answer the lady's point there.
Perfect. I'll do a two-for answer here. In all honesty, I think it's quite rich from the Scottish Conservatives and Scottish Labour to be talking about this just transition when they have the energy profit levy. Conservatives brought it in to bleed the oil and gas sector dry because they think, let's get some more money out of them. Labour's continued and talks about a just transition. I agree with Iris's point because I think we've both said that quote a few times. We cannot have a Thatcher in the coal mine. It's a metaphor. It's not saying that's what, it's harkening back to what Thatcher did with the coal mines, which was just close them, no plan. It is about the northeast of Scotland having a cohesive plan to take people from the oil and gas sector and move them into the renewable sector. If you have an oil rig off the coast of Aberdeen, you can also have a wind farm. There are similar types of jobs. It's underwater exploration. It's underwater engineering. I worked for an MP up in Aberdeenshire, so I did a bit on it for a while. So I think that's my point on climate change. On that support for individuals that have been diagnosed with neurodiverse conditions, we are proposing 2,000 additional support needs teachers to provide that support within the classroom, because at this point in time, teachers are expected to do everything in the classroom. So they're expected to support students that have either got autism, ADHD, or dyslexia in my case, while also doing all the other teaching aspects. We need an additional support within the classrooms, and we're proposing 2,000. That's just a starting point, because we need to work towards getting this right, because I don't think we are at the moment.
Okay. Jamie, last of all, and I wonder if you could just address the kind of, I don't know, the fundamental point about whether Reform believes in man-made climate change. And if you want to address the point that the gentleman made, it's up to you.
3 points. First of all, I was never in the SNP, I was always Labour. I attended an event in Holyrood that anyone can sit in the gallery and watch an event. And I've got friends across the political spectrum, and I think that's the way it should be. So I think that's a good thing. In terms of trust in politics, like, I was, Labour all my life, but I just didn't believe that Labour were delivering for working class communities anymore. I felt like there was a lot of people getting left behind. And I felt with Reform, what drove me towards that was actually reforming the system, reforming public services, whether that be looking at how we, the local councils, how to be more efficient in every area of the public service, so we can actually deliver for working people. So that's the way I look at it. If you see something broken, you want to go and fix it. In terms of the climate change, well, currently we emit about 1% of the global emissions, so that's a small percentage. And when you compare that to China and the USA, which is over 50%, China, opening a coal mine every single day. So what we're doing now is we're importing our gas and oil from Norway, making energy more expensive, which is punishing working people, and they're scared to put their heating on. And we're also losing jobs at the same time that we could be creating in the North Sea. We've got a lot of resources. I want to see energy bills come down for people so that people can be well supported. I thought it was absolutely awful when the winter fuel allowance was scrapped, especially in Scotland, because Scotland's a much colder place. So when I see policies like that, and I see what's happening with importing oil and gas instead of using their own resources, which will create jobs and also bring down bills, and also support small businesses, because often the reason that we're seeing en masse small businesses closing, particularly pubs, is they say that the rise in energy costs. So I want to support our town centres. On the point on mental health, I think mental health is often overlooked. A good example was that there was actually someone, and I worked in an old profession, and they were off for a good period of time, and there was another person that was off as well, and one of them was off for mental health, and another one had it was a physical injury, broken arm, and the one that had a broken arm, they got a lot of get well soon cards, but the one with mental health didn't. And I thought to myself at the time, I was like, wow, this isn't taken seriously enough. So what we need to actually do is properly invest and actually have people speaking out, because often people are scared to speak out. And I think what's happened during the COVID pandemic as well, where we saw people being isolated, it hasn't helped in terms of people going out and socialising. So we need more support there in terms of through the NHS.
Thank you. Right. We're running out of time, so we're going to try and rattle through a couple more questions before we leave. So I'm going to ask Brody if you'd like to ask his question. Brody is just here. Does somebody have a microphone? Just guy in the Scotland top. No, is it Scotland top? No, it's not a Scotland top. It's a Germany top. Okay. Each to his own.
What would your opinion be on rejoining the European Union, but more specifically... more specifically, the benefits that come with Erasmus for young people?
So rejoining the European Union and Erasmus, which I think we are now coming back into in 2027, young people in the UK about 100,000 young people every year will be able to travel to Europe, which I think we could probably all agree is a good thing. So rejoining the European Union, I'm going to come straight to you, Ross.
That makes sense that you would start with me, actually. No, I wouldn't support that. I supported Remain in 2016. We had that point about trust. I'm going to be very honest. I did support Remain in 2016. But listen, people have voted. We need to make the best of it. And I actually do think we can make the best of Brexit. Have we done that yet? I don't think we've gone further and fast enough. But I do think we need to work towards that. On the point about Erasmus specifically, I actually think this is something that could be a Brexit benefit for young people. We have what was called the Turing scheme, which I think is going to go to the wayside when we rejoin Erasmus. That's a fantastic initiative because that doesn't cap you, so to speak, within the EU or within Europe. You can go to anywhere in the world that signs up to that, whether it's Canberra or Canada, whether you're in Sydney or Singapore. There are fantastic worlds of opportunities out there for young people. So I don't want to see us just look to Europe, although we should, because listen, they're our closest neighbours. I still want to work with them. We need to be global. And actually, if we do want to make the best of Brexit, going global is the way to do that.
Okay. Let me come to Callum on this one.
Simple answer is yes. Honestly, Brodie, it's one of the most important things that's caused so many issues to this country is Brexit, a Brexit that Scotland, as well as Northern Ireland, did not vote for. And the difference is Northern Ireland had its vote respected. It now has its own separate deal in relation to that, but we don't. And the argument that, oh, but it's not possible, it's never happened before, is nonsense. Greenland is not in the EU, even though Denmark and the Faroe Islands are, because Greenland didn't want to join it. It's still part of Denmark. So at the end of the day, we need to rejoin the EU. Fortunately, I'm part of the generation that actually lost out on Erasmus. I went through uni specifically during the period that we actually lost out of Erasmus completely, so it was opportunities that were taken away from me and so many other people my age. And at the end of the day, this idea of going global from the Conservatives is nonsense. The EU was our pathway into a far better deal with so many countries around the world because of a larger negotiation bloc. That's something that has since been taken away from us, and now we're effectively begging and pleading with other countries to be able to do these deals, which will have an impact on educational opportunities globally, such that even the deal that we had with Australia and New Zealand, agreed by Boris Johnson, was so ridiculously bad that even the presenters on their TV started laughing at us for it. So it's these kind of issues that are not going to be addressed by simply saying, well, we voted for Brexit, because we didn't. We didn't vote for Brexit in Scotland.
But if being part of the European Union is good, why is leaving the UK bad?
Because the EU and the UK aren't really compatible. So the EU, in a way, acts like to Scotland how Holyrood acts to Westminster. It is almost in a way of us choosing to devolve powers to the EU. Powers that we negotiate and we can rescind at any point. We can join or we can leave. It's also largely an economic union, not a political one. It's one where our own parliament still has the final say on a large, vast majority of issues that we just don't have in the UK. And we've also seen how the EU, although when it comes to certain things around human rights, can override certain parliaments, doesn't extend any further than that. So we wouldn't be at risk of things like a Section 35, or as what was conveniently left out of discussions around housing from Labour and Eleanor, was the reason that we bring up Westminster, even in a Holyrood election, is because of the impact it has. We wanted to put forward a heating and homes bill back in November, but we needed the UK to clarify Westminster to give their outcomes on energy costs and provide that clarity, because we are still devolved, we're not fully independent. They didn't do that. In fact, they only published it in January, leaving us no time to be able to do it ourselves, which meant it had to be shelved. That is a bill that we lost out on devolved powers, because the UK government couldn't do its job.
So just, sorry, if I wouldn't mind, just one last question, because I thought the question was going to be more about independence, and I'm interested to get into that. Because as I understand it now, the position is that the SNP is the biggest party next week. You'll immediately push for a referendum. Is that correct?
Yes.
In any circumstance. It doesn't have to be a majority.
Of course, we're pro-independence, as is the Greens.
But I thought the position was that you had to be a majority.
So the reason why we've been pushing so hard on the majority is just simply because of the precedent and how the UK works in terms of legal precedents that get set. The SNP in 2011 got a majority. Then we got a referendum. 2016, 2021, the SNP and the Greens had a pro-independence majority, but we didn't get a referendum out of those, particularly in 2021 when we did stand on the basis of getting a referendum. And so the argument is that if an SNP majority is what equates a delivery of a referendum, or just a single party getting that majority that is pro-independence, then that is the precedent that's been set that we want to try and build upon. Obviously, if there's still a pro-independence majority after the election, we're still going to push for a referendum either way.
When do you want this referendum?
I mean, the sooner rather than later, if I'm being honest.
Next year?
I don't think it's realistic to do a referendum in a year, even with...
Year after?
Pardon?
Year after?
Could be. I mean, I'd like to have one before 2030, but 2028 is ideal.
Okay. 2028, there we have it. Hot off the press.
Oh, yes.
Okay, Eleanor, I'll go back to the original question, but feel free to answer Callum as well if you wish. I mean, I think if you spoke to most Labour people, they'd all say they want back in the European Union, right?
Great question. I love that you flagged the Erasmus program, which has been re-established. It was hard work, we're being creative, and although obviously I'm keen to laser focus on the Scottish elections, I have to give my Westminster colleagues a lot of credit for re-establishing that. I was an Erasmus scholar. I went to do a kind of apprenticeship at the Museum of Ethnology in Ljubljana. And it was fantastic, transformative, and I'd want that for everybody. I am laser focused on next week and the future of Scotland. I would raise that the most important way, potentially, that Brexit has impacted Scotland and the UK is the cost of living crisis and the unaffordability of our public services just now. It'd be really interesting to see what our Reform colleagues think about that and Nigel Farage's role in engineering that. But generally, I think what's really important when we're thinking about these upcoming elections is to think for ourselves about the ways in which that referendum changed everything in terms of the public service landscape and the cost of living crisis, and to think how was that managed? In this country, that was managed by the SNP, and in their most recent budget, they've got a £5 billion black hole that the Auditor General has flagged between what they say they're going to spend on public services and what they can afford to spend. And it's that affordability crisis that really, for me, is the long-term impact of the Brexit decision.
So do you think we should go back into the European Union?
I love Europe.
We all love Europe.
I think my colleagues in Westminster are working really hard and really creatively, actually, to be fair to them. I don't know if creativity and politicians are often thought of in the same breath, but you know, they're thinking of lots of and working really hard to find ways to be closer to Europe whilst the referendum result still stands.
Okay. Yes, I'm going to ask. I'll ask Iris next, if that's okay. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. We Greens do believe that we'd be stronger with Scotland in Europe. I do say this on the prerequisite that my Holyrood constituency mostly aligns with what was one of the most pre-EU Westminster constituencies. So as you can imagine, this is very strongly felt on the doors. Not to kick a dead horse as well, but to go back 10 years to this referendum that we did have, that won by very slim margins. We saw Nigel Farage's battle bus, and with Boris Johnson with the £350 million for the NHS, along with all of these big arguments about how we would be so much more powerful outside of Europe, how we would be able to create more jobs, we'd have these really fancy trade deals. And really, when it happened, what it came down to, it was a project of deregulation by the Conservative Party, who basically got to the end of their tether after doing austerity for long enough here in the UK at home and thought, how else can we make some cuts? And basically did that. Of course, it was your leader that catalysed that along, and it was your party that did that. But today, and even back then, Scotland did not vote to leave the EU. So as Greens, we would push alongside the SNP and Labour if they decided to be pro-EU, I don't know where they are at the moment, to make sure that we have Scotland at the heart of Europe. It's our largest trading bloc. We've got a lot of similarities with Europe, and we'd love to see us go back into the EU, yes.
Jamie, just very briefly, I'm trying to move on, but...
Can I come in as well?
After Jamie, is that okay? Yeah. So I think the kind of analysis is the economy is now about 6 to 8% smaller than it was since Brexit. So how is that helping the working class communities that you say you want to represent?
Well, I think Brexit's a great opportunity. Obviously, throughout
We haven't taken it yet, have we?
Well, what's happened during that time, we've had a pandemic, a global pandemic that shut the whole world down. We've obviously had the Ukraine war as well. But I do think that we could go global. We've already saw trade deals with, so Canada and New Zealand. I think we can go further. We can have much more trade deals. I think it's been wasted so far. But I think that Brexit gives us opportunity to make laws in the UK. In the European Union, there is a democratic deficit. That's fundamental. You have the European Parliament, but they can only propose legislation that needs to get signed off by commissioners who are, are not democratically elected. So how is that fair? So I think it's better that decisions are made in Westminster instead of in Brussels. So I think that there is a democratic deficit there, but I also think there's opportunities to look further afield at where we can trade. I think we could utilise, using the Commonwealth as well. We've got great partnerships in there, so we could definitely have a trading bloc in there. Obviously, I mentioned earlier on about the Turing scheme. The good thing about the Turing scheme as well was that was specifically focusing on those that were disadvantaged as well, lower income backgrounds and care experienced. So I thought that was actually positive. So that's what I think.
Thanks. Daniel, if we're going to respect the independence referendum, which is what Liberal Democrats and other parties say, surely we should be respecting the Brexit referendum and not re-litigating it.
I don't think we're relitigating at this point. I think we are already seeing us drifting back to the EU. Personally, the Scottish Liberal Democrats and the Liberal Democrats are fully committed to rejoining the European Union. It is a staunch policy for us. We have always been pro-European and we continue to will be. That referendum, we're talking about trust in politics, somebody asked about that. Let's be honest, it was the internal squabbles of the Conservative Party played out in the electorate in a referendum because David Cameron went, I'll just put it to the electorate, put this to bed. He was on the Remain side. And we had Nigel Farage pitch for it. I mean, in all honesty, is Farage going to, I would love to hear the answer to this, is Farage going to take his MEP pension as well after being an MEP for 21 years? Nobody's ever answered that question. This goes to the heart of trust in politics. That referendum was done to quell an internal debate within the Conservative Party. It was not done for anything other than that because we have not seen a Brexit benefit at all.
Okay, right. We're going to spend our last 10 minutes hearing from you. So please raise your hands if you'd like to make a point or a comment. I'm really sorry. The front here, the lady in the middle, maybe. So let's just make some quick points and let's get around the room.
I'd like to ask an issue that hasn't been mentioned yet. Sorry. How are you going to tackle gender-based violence, and especially with the current rise of the far right, how are you going to protect trans people and people of colour?
Okay, thank you. I tell you what I'm going to do is I'm going to just try and put these questions to maybe individuals because otherwise it's just going to take too long. But let's have another question or a point anybody wants to make. Yeah, gentleman just there, just right there. Yeah.
Yeah, this is for Callum. To join the EU, we need a budget deficit of less than 3%. It's currently 15%, and we also need to have our own currency, which would involve devaluation of about 20%. I'm just interested in what you'd like to cut in order to get into EU.
Right, that's all right. That's good for Callum. Right, over here. Sorry, I'll come over to you, Law, in a minute. Well, I'm going to take 6 points, right?
This is similar to the lady in front of me's question. When I was reviewing all the manifestos, I found for every party apart from Reform that in terms of the problem with sexual violence in Scotland, how it's at the second highest peak since 1971. It's been increasing over the last couple of years. We know that over 80% of victims are women, and we also know that a third of these victims are under 18. So my question specifically for Reform is, what are you going to do, A, for the minors in Scotland who are exploited, and furthermore, women as a whole? How are you going to prevent sexual crime?
Okay, over here. There's a guy just right here.
Hi, my question is specifically to the Reform UK representative.
All right, Jamie.
I'd like to address some points that you made previously on climate change. You said that the UK was responsible for 1% of the global emissions. However, you don't take into account that 1% is actually a larger number than it seems. This is because you compared it to countries like the USA and China. However, they are much vaster countries, and the UK is such a small and a really small island. Secondly, you failed to mention that there's the idea of the slippery slope. Basically, if it's just 1% now, then what will that number be in 10, 20 years? It's going to be all of us who are affected by this increase. And I'd like to ask, what are Reform UK's plans to address the climate crisis, which are ultimately going to affect all of us?
Thanks very much. There's a lady right at the front.
Hi, Jamie. I'm Myrne, a member of the Scottish Youth Parliament. This is a question for you as you're a member of Reform. Nigel Farage is wanting to get rid of the 1951 Convention Act. Under that act, you can come to the UK however you want and not get sent back to your country if there is harm. What about those children that are coming from Palestine, Ukraine, and they're getting sent back? What are you and your party going to do about it to make sure those children are not getting killed?
Okay. Okay, does anybody have a question not for Jamie? You've already asked the question, right. So right at the back, the lady right at the back. And then we'll just kind of come to the panel and see what they want to say.
Hi, I'm a first-time voter as I turned 16 yesterday.
Way.
Can you... Could you please pitch in one sentence why first-time voters and young people should vote for your party? And please do it in one sentence.
Great question. Good question. Right. Gosh, how do we go with that? Jamie, do you want to have a go first, since most of those questions seem to be aimed at you? Have a go.
First of all, on violence, all violence is wrong, and we need to tackle violence on females. I saw obviously the documentary recently on the manosphere. It was horrific when I watched it, and the fact that so many people are actually, getting engaged in this, giving thousands of views on this, I thought it was pretty worrying. More needs to be done to tackle that, undoubtedly. We need to be taking things more seriously in terms of the criminal justice system, because what we're seeing now is when people are reporting things like rape, we're not actually seeing often people getting criminalised for it. So we need to actually be tougher on the criminal justice system. So we need to be harsher. We need to knuckle down on that, because it's unacceptable that anyone should feel unsafe, and it's horrible to hear that women feel unsafe in society. It's wrong. It's wrong.
So hang on, sorry. There was something? What about? Well, we've kind of went through the climate change issue, I think. Is that okay? Since you've got the microphone, what's your one sentence pitch to a first-time voter? 10 seconds.
You should vote Reform because we're offering fundamental change that this country has never saw before.
Brilliant. Okay. Who would like? Yeah, Daniel.
On your point about it was the 1951 Act, wasn't it? Yes. I used to work at the Scottish Refugee Council, and I used to work with Holyrood, the Scotland Children's Charity, and we delivered the Guardianship Scotland programme. This is a programme that supports unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, which I think is what you're referring to. Frankly, my year and 6 months at the Scottish Refugee Council went downhill and downhill and downhill because of political rhetoric from people like Nigel Farage, and I'm sorry to say, Keir Starmer saying island of strangers. And frankly, the Home Secretary is changing the rules now, which make it harder for people who have come here legally under our international treaties to protect themselves. On the point of violence against women, Wendy Chamberlain, our MP for North East 5, has put forward a motion at our conference. It is party policy. It's something she's working very hard on to make sure we're working towards our proposal here. When it comes to the point about reform, I mean, you have Andrew Tate as one of your people that Nigel Farage puts his arm around. Frankly, he has been arrested and put in prison for rape in Romania, and he is the one who's perpetrating this poor...
Did he put his arm around him? I mean, figuratively, not literally.
Put his hand around him. Put his arms around him. Yeah, I'm pretty certain he has. Is anybody wants to correct me on that one?
You're correct. Yeah, he said he was a fine
Sorry,
guy.
I stand corrected.
I think that's what we need to tackle. And there's misogyny in every aspect of social media now, and it is people like Andrew Tate and Killer, whatever his name is.
So your 10-second pitch to the girl at the back.
Second pitch. In this election, you should vote Scottish Liberal Democrats because we're putting forward change with fairness at its heart and really getting to the heart of working for our communities.
Thank you very much. Callum, anything you'd like to pick up on all those questions?
Yeah, I thought you'd actually come to me last with me being the other version of Jamie here, I suppose, with targeted questions. But on the first point, on gender violence, as well as like attacking and effectively scapegoating the most vulnerable communities in our society, like I fully recognise this. And importantly, I'm actually a long-time supporter of the White Ribbon campaign in Scotland. I do believe that there is an epidemic of male violence against women. And importantly, the only way that we're going to address that is if we, instead of just saying, you know, oh, we could do this, we can like change policy or we can introduce bills. We are going to introduce the misogyny bill, but it's much more than that. It's about a cultural shift too. And it's about getting, not just telling women, here's the things that you can do to get help. It's about telling men what they need to do to make sure that the very men that are the problems are the ones that are getting shut down, called out, and then charged for all the nonsense that they end up doing. We need to be able to support our communities, no matter who they are, across the board as well. When it comes to trans rights, because I know you specifically mentioned in reference to trans people, we are fully committing to a conversion practices ban that will be trans inclusive. And we're also the only party that is explicitly recognised within party policy from our members in relation to the recognition of intersex people and people with variations in sex characteristics. One of the very communities that are roughly about the same number of gingers around the world, or the number of Gaelic speakers in Scotland, and yet they're effectively completely erased to the point where it's just medical disinformation entirely to target women and also trans people. On your point about the deficit, so it's a bit more complicated than that. In terms of currency only takes a few days to even set up for some countries. I mean, Moldova, Croatia, you name it, it took them days, weeks to set up their own currency and barely cost anything to do so. It's not a hard currency we're looking to set up, it would be a soft currency. But importantly, rejoining the EU in relation to deficit, it's also looking at what actually is causing this deficit. If your references to this so-called 15 billion deficit, that's not how the numbers actually work. We don't have a 15 billion deficit, as what JARS claims. Because JARS doesn't claim that, it has never claimed that. It is a look at the public sector economy and not taking anything else into account, the private sector or otherwise. Importantly, we're not going to have so much wasteful spending from Westminster either when it comes to things like even nuclear. At this point, we are now having to pay for the RAB charge, which is to help fund Sizewell C in Suffolk. That's an extra £12, per household, as is expected from the UK government, to fund this. Every household in Scotland paying this fee, on top of small businesses paying 40 quid a year. It's also the amount of money we would save from that, £10. We're paying £12 to save £10 in 15 years' time for a nuclear power plant in England, the south of England. It's ridiculous. So yes, it is about recognising that there is a ridiculous amount of wasteful spending and the fact that mitigation from the Scottish Parliament is more expensive than us actually having the powers to address the problems at the root cause.
Can I get your 10-second answer?
What did I write down? Sorry, trying to remember.
It's not easy, I know.
Basically, to have a future again.
That was 2 seconds. Excellent.
Yeah.
We can have our 8 seconds back. Eleanor, would you like to have a go next at all these various issues?
Yeah, well, I'm very mindful of time, and those were all wonderful questions and points, especially to do with gender-based violence. So I'm wondering whether it'd be more appropriate if you'd be welcome to come find me after the panel, because I'm not sure I could give any of those topics the time they deserve just now. But and also mindful of time, I unfortunately don't have any time to get into the irony of the SNP talking about wasteful spending, which is a shame. But what I will do is give my 2-sentence pitch to our wonderful new voter, which is that young people need change and Scotland needs change, and Labour understand that change and fundamentally have the ability to deliver on it.
Thanks very much, Eleanor. Over to you, Iris.
I'll start with the gender-based violence questions, and there were 2 of them. Something I didn't mention in the introduction is I was named on the Women's 30 Under 30 list for my activism against gender-based violence. Won't get into the reasons why I'm an activist about gender-based violence, but I know personally how violence can tear about a home. We've got stuff in the manifesto, but personally, from my work in this area, I'd love to see our higher education institutions implement the Emily test, and I'd love to see pressure from all of the politicians here to have that. We need education on the ground level, talking about what misogyny looks like, what it feels like, and the behaviours that permit it. We've spoken about the cultural change that we need, but we need a political change, and we need politicians that aren't afraid to call that out. We've already mentioned Andrew Tate. I think I can't leave this panel without saying Donald Trump is a convicted rapist, and we have seen politicians... We've seen politicians cozy up to him, call him a friend, make it seem like that is an acceptable behaviour for men and young men to do across the world. Grab them by the pussy, as he says. It's almost swore then. It's disgusting, and I think that we need that in politics, specifically on trans people, which was part of your question. That's about bringing that heat of that debate absolutely down. I'm one of 2 transgender candidates, I believe, for Holyrood. I'm the only one that's predicted to potentially win, which would make me the first transgender person to sit in a parliament in the UK. And I am terrified. I can tell you, if any of you want to go and look at my social media posts, or if anyone wants to look through the messages or the death threats that I get, the things that people say about me and don't know me, that is because we have weak politicians that are too afraid to stand up and have a real debate about how we accommodate every single person in society. And it's disgraceful. And again, another thing that I need to call out before leaving here, Labour have launched part of their manifesto suggesting some of the most restrictive, the largest restrictions on transgender people in the Western world, outside of some of Trump's deep red states. And that's something that us Greens would absolutely fight against in Holyrood. Onto the refugee question, I'm going to say, sorry, I'm going through them. Daniel's absolutely correct with everything that he said. This is about compassion and fairness and making sure that Scotland is a welcoming place to be. We do not want to be pointing fingers at our friends. I was recently at an engagement in my constituency with an organisation that works refugees, and there was a man there talking about how he's an MP, was an MP in his home country, and he's come to Scotland, and now he can't work. He just wants to work and be a productive member of the community. So instead of talking about how we can make it productive members of the community, we have people like Reform pointing fingers at those that are just looking for a hand up. And I think, again, sorry, I'm going on and on and on. About the 10-second pitch, from me, I would say it's about ambition, fairness, and a Scotland that has young people at its heart. Vote for the Scottish Greens on the 7th of May. Thank you so much.
Okay, and final word goes to Ross.
I know everybody said they're very conscious of time. I really try and will be here. On the point about gender-based violence, you're absolutely spot on. In the year 2023-24, there were 1,583 convictions of sexual offences in Scotland. Only 390 of those people went to jail. You nearly swore, I will. That's a fucking disgrace. An absolute disgrace, and you should be all angry about that. So what we want to do is we want to increase the maximum sentence for rapists in this country, so there's no light sentencing for them. We want to have mandatory life sentences for child rapists. And what we want to do as well is scrap these ridiculous guidelines that have under 25s getting light touch sentencing, even if it is a sexual crime. There is not a young woman in this room who should be sitting in university worried that if they bring a claim against somebody that the justice system is not going to do right by them. That is an absolute disgrace. In terms of the young lady up the back there who's a first-time voter, thank you very much. All I would say to you is vote for us for radical renewal of a country that you haven't known, but I want you to.
Right, okay, thank you. We are overdue, so we're going to have 2 very last summing up. So I'm going to ask Ellie Craig, the chair of the Scottish Youth Parliament, to come and sum up. Ellie.
Not too sure where to go. I'll just stand here. Hi, everyone. As Eddie said, I'm Ellie. I'm the chair of the Scottish Youth Parliament, but I also was a student on the UK Youth Poll course, so I'm wearing 2 different hats today. I'm sure you can all agree that was a really interesting discussion, and I think no matter your politics, you can agree that it's really good that we have young candidates and that no matter the makeup of the Scottish Parliament, young voices are heard and represented. I'm not going to try and sum up all of the questions asked in that debate. I've not went to too many hustings, but I think that's probably a record number of topics in an hour and a half-ish. But we did cover tough questions around why they got into politics, the housing crisis, that was right back at the start. Not sure if I can even remember that far back now. What policies they've got specifically for young people, stuff about the climate, the EU, mental health, trust in politics, gender-based violence, immigration, and then my favourite question, which was the 10-second pitch. So yeah, I think there's a lot for people to think about before they go to the polls next Thursday. In terms of the sort of UK Youth Poll and Scottish Youth Parliament manifesto, so the Scottish Youth Parliament has a manifesto of our own. It's called Dear Scotland's Future. A lot of the topics that have been asked about tonight are covered in there. So stuff about education, community, sustainability, justice, and young people's rights. We consulted over 5,000 young people from across Scotland, and obviously the UK Youth Poll is UK-wide, but this one is Scotland-specific. So yeah, and I think that tonight has been a really good show that young people are not disinterested in politics. We don't not care. We're not disengaged as a demographic because of that. It's because we don't see ourselves represented. And so, yes, I would encourage everybody, the last thing for me would be to go out and vote and encourage your friends to vote. Thank you.
And finally, since we're in his gaff, Reverend Scott Rennie.
Thanks, Ed. Everyone, I just want to say a huge thank you to the John Smith Centre and to our panellists for giving us such a good discussion this evening. St Giles, in about a fortnight's time, will be host to the very first event that MSPs attend, which is the kirking, the blessing of the new Parliament, and that will be here with the great and the good. And St Giles is the place where all of Scotland's big state occasions take place. And that's why I thought it was such a great idea to have this event here, because all these state occasions, at the end of the day, they are about us. And fundamentally, this is a place for people. The people, it's an inclusive place. It's a place that is the home of the Scottish Reformation, the biggest political, social, religious upheaval in Scotland's history. And fundamentally, I want St Giles to be a place for good conversations. We've had a huge variety of views on different things, and the thing that our democracy needs most of all, particularly I think in the times we live in, is places for good conversation and good, respectful, intelligent debate. And I think we've had that in spadefuls tonight. So thanks to our candidates and panellists, and a huge thank you to you, Eddie, and to the John Smith Centre for coming to Edinburgh and to St Giles tonight.
Okay. Just echo those thanks and good night. Thank you very much.